Welcome to Blackbriar Gaming. In this video, I want to touch on army creation from the perspective of alliances. Legions Imperialis, due to its scale and its scope, really encourages armies made up of multiple factions. And while I think there will be some players that form armies entirely from one legion, I think the majority of players will be looking to create more diverse forces. There's plenty of benefits of forming multi-factional armies, from a lore, hobby, and gameplay perspective. I wanted to put together a video that presented a bunch of potential ideas for Legions Imperialis armies, giving players inspiration on which forces they could be allying to bring the lore of the Heresy to life and to pack a punch on the table. Just a quick note before we get into it, a subscribe and a like really helps us reach a bigger audience, so if you enjoy the video, hit those buttons down below. So, how do we form alliances? Your current options are Legiones Astartes, the Solar Auxilia, Knights Houses, and Titan Legios. You are required to pick a single faction as your primary army list. It could be Solar Auxilia, or it could be a particular legion of Space Marines. Then you get 30% of your total points allocation to spend towards allied formations, and an allowance of one allied formation or strategic asset, which is how we organize Knights and Titans, for every formation in your primary army list. There are no other restrictions around the number of different allies you can take. If you have 3 formations in your primary army list, you can have up to 3 different allied contingents, as long as they come in under that points allocation. I'll be looking at combinations from the perspective of 5 of my favourite Horus Heresy battles and campaigns, to make sure our armies are forged in lore. Though I won't be touching on the Siege of Terra today, which I think deserves its own video. Where relevant, I'll also be looking at some of the impacts of these combinations from a gameplay perspective. Let's jump on in. I'm going to start with the Battle of Isfahan 3. It's only appropriate to start off with the third planet of the Isfahan system. These can be either Loyalists or Traitors, which is neat and relatively unique to this opening moment of the Heresy. These combinations include any 2 or more of the Sons of Horus, the World Eaters, the Emperor's Children, and the Death Guard. On the Traitor side, you would also be well within your lore rights to include Titans from either Legio Mortis, Audax, or Vulpa. For the Loyalists, which I like to call the Purged, the final days of their last stand predominantly included Sons of Horus and Emperor's Children, though you'd definitely get away with including World Eaters and Death Guard formations in there. Bonus hobby points to any Loyalist Isfahan 3 force that includes an Emperor's Children Contempted Dreadnought with a fancy paint job to represent Rylanor. I really like the combinations here from a gameplay perspective, as both the Emperor's Children and Death Guard have special rules that provide more strategic benefits, either interacting with a single turn's initiative order or making sections of the battlefield dangerous terrain. Meanwhile, the Sons of Horus excel in close firefights, and the World Eaters are close combat monsters. Each allied contingent of an Isfahan 3 style force brings its own diverse bonuses, and they complement each other excellently. Next, let's move on to the drop site massacre on Isfahan 5. We'll jump to Isfahan 5 before we move outside of the system. This is one of the greatest inspirations for getting a whole bunch of legions into the mix. From the Traitors' perspective, you're once again looking at a combination of the Sons of Horus, World Eaters, Emperor's Children, or Death Guard. But you also have the option of including almost any other Traitor Legion, including the Word Bearers, Iron Warriors, Night Lords, or the Alpha Legion. If I were building an Isfahan 5 style Traitor army, I'd choose one of those first 4 to be a more defensive force, probably the Sons of Horus or Death Guard, who represent the preparation of the killing ground with their awesome, dangerous terrain rules, going heavy on the artillery, battle tanks, heavy armor, and bastion detachments. Then I'd choose one of the second group, maybe the Iron Warriors or the Alpha Legion, to form a Legion aerial assault formation, once we actually get access to some Legion Vanguard units and make that playable. This allied contingent would represent the betrayal landing behind or outflanking the enemy forces to contest back and midfield objectives. The Iron Warriors are particularly adept at playing the objective game, while the Alpha Legion can give a detachment infiltrate, outflank, or forward deployment. I'd use this to give a sizable detachment of Dreadnoughts the outflank special role and have them threaten the enemy's flank. For the Loyalists, you have the soon-to-be shattered legions, the Iron Hands, the Salamanders, and the Raven Guard. This grouping of legions is appropriate for all kinds of campaigns throughout the Heresy, though the army style you'd build for an Isfahan 5 theme would certainly be different to anything post the massacre. I think I'd make Iron Hands the primary army list here, going heavy on Terminators to represent the 10 companies of 10th Legion Morlocks, perhaps backed into Thunderhawks or the future Land Raiders we have coming. Back this up with a Legion Armied Company formation to open up 2 allied contingents and take advantage of the 10th special rules. I'd have a single Raven Guard demi-company formation with a bunch of infiltrating infantry to put early game pressure on objectives, and a single Salamander's Garrison Force formation to provide some long-range supporting fire. I think this is an extremely flexible and powerful force that is dripping in narrative potential. Now we're going to move on to the Battle of Calth and the Shadow Crusade. Moving to the eastern fringes gives us access to some loyalist legions that otherwise only played minor parts in the Horus Heresy. The 13th and 1st Legions, the Ultramarines and Dark Angels, as they defend the 500 worlds against the Wordbearers and World Eaters. There were lots of Titans involved and plenty of mortals. While not necessarily Solar Auxilia, you could get away with either representing the Loyalist Auxilia or Traitor Cultists with Solar Auxilia rules and models. Though alternatively, sourced Imperial Army models would be my go-to, and there's some great files out there. I'd go Ultramarines for the primary list with Dark Angels and Titans as the allies for a force themed around the battles going on in the 500 worlds. Ultramarines and Dark Angels complement each other beautifully. Your Ultramarines provide long and mid-range consistent firepower, while your Phosphex armed Dark Angels infantry storm buildings and Ravenwing cavalry outflank the enemy. The Traitors list writes itself, with Wordbearers as the main force, World Eaters and Titans as the allied contingents. Wordbearers are such a solid force that I'd go heavy on a few 17th formations and only include probably a single World Eaters formation in this one, with the purpose of getting into close combat as soon as possible. A demi-company filled and bulked out with Assault Marines and Terminators would be my go-to. A couple of Warhound Titans finishes this force off and sets you up to burn and pillage your Waikos Ultramar. Now for the Beta Garmin campaign. Things start getting real juicy in the later phases of the Beta Garmin campaign, with multiple legions from both factions pouring into the system to secure the strategic warp routes. You've got the Salamanders, White Scars, Blood Angels, and Imperial Fists getting into the thick of it, supported by an absolute sea of Nighthouses, Titan Legios, and Solar Auxilia regiments. The Traitors include the Sons of Horus, Wordbearers, Iron Warriors, and Emperor's Children. Similarly, with a host of accompanying Knights, Titans, and Imperial Army units, many of which were made up of the Solar Auxilia. This will actually be the campaign I'll be basing my White Scar army on, backed up by Knights, Titans, and the Solar. Beta Garmin forces are seemingly what the Legions Imperialis starter set was kind of made for, so I'd be taking advantage of that. For something that packs a bit more punch, a Blood Angels force backed up by Imperial Fist allies would be a potent combination. Doing something a bit different with the Traitors, I'd go with an Emperor's Children force supported by Iron Warrior allies. I'd be taking full advantage of that 30% allied allotment for the Iron Warriors and including bulk infantry and transports to press objectives. It doesn't really matter how you build the Emperor's Children portion of this army from a rules perspective, but having them as your primary selection is worth it to get that guaranteed initiative for the turn. Finally, I'm going to look at the Battle of Jurant and the Siege of Barbarous. For my 5th choice, I'm kind of cheating and I've selected 2. Though rather minor conflicts, they allow us to talk about those legions we haven't yet covered. Firstly, the Battle of Jurant. That saw the Space Wolves besieged on the planet of Jurant 3 by the combined forces of the Sons of Horus, Alpha Legion, World Eaters, and Thousand Suns. Eventually, the Raven Guard come to the rescue and enabled the withdrawal of the battered 6th Legion. For the Loyalists, you're obviously looking at the Raven Guard and the Space Wolves. Now, this might be a big call, but Space Wolves, with their objectively terrible Legion rules, may actually be key to a sneaky anti-meta list. As an objective-based game, I think infiltrating is going to be very powerful, and this list not only shuts down infiltrating with your Space Wolves, but also takes full advantage of it with the Raven Guard, who I'd have as the primary list. Putting it out there now, this might be the anti-meta list ready to go from the start. For my pick on some Jurant-themed Traitors, I'm going with World Eaters and Thousand Suns. Though ideologically opposed, they make decent battle buddies. The Thousand Suns use their kind shields to protect them in a mid-range firefight, while the World Eaters charge on in. Not my best pairing, but you're never going to get a great pairing for the Thousand Suns outside of the Siege of Terror. The Siege of Barbarous is a fun one. The Dark Angels finally make an appearance. They don't. That is not correct. We have discussed the Dark Angels before. But as they were generally isolated from the majority of the Heresy, the Siege of Barbarous is a good chance to get them into the mix. Here they're joined by the Space Wolves and Raven Guard. I'd go Dark Angels heavy, utilising their rules to have 3 formations. One that's infantry heavy, one that's cavalry heavy, and one that's heavy on its armour. I then support with a formation of Space Wolves scattered throughout my deployment to counter any sneaky infiltration or outflanking, and a formation of Raven Guard for capturing early objectives. Much like the Jurant combo, this is some meta shenanigans that are now supported by the might of the First Legion. The Traitors included the Death Guard, Iron Warriors, and Sons of Horus. All 3 elements would make a very powerful list. Death Guard to shut down movement opportunities of your opponent, Iron Warriors to contest objectives with their increased tactical strength, and Sons of Horus to put the hurt on in the close range firefight. I think for a Barbarous themed army, I'd go with Sons of Horus for the primary list, and swarm the board with para-armoured infantry and Terminators. That brings us to the end of our look at narrative-driven, fun and powerful combos for your Legions Imperialis armies. Getting Titans and Knights into any of those forces is generally encouraged and usually driven by lore as well. Certainly making use of those Warhounds in the core box is going to be a must to get your points up in early games. Let me know in the comments which combos appeal to you, or what alliances you're thinking of running for your armies outside of the ones I've mentioned today. Bonus points if they're linked to a Heresy campaign. Importantly, make sure to keep rolling those dice and getting hyped for Heresy.